Let's talk about this deal, this agreement that was worked out today between the United States and Russia to avoid some accidental head-on collision between fighter jets over Syria. The secrecy of this deal, they're not making it public. Does that concern you?
It doesn't. I think that the Pentagon knows and understands how important it is to make sure that our troops are not put into harm's way and that we're not put into a situation where you have this accidental military conflict with Russia in the air. So I think making this deal with Russia to deconflict that is an important thing. But there's a bigger issue here that I'm concerned with, and that is the fact that the U.S. and the CIA are working to overthrow the Syrian government of Assad, while Russia, a longtime ally of Assad for decades now, is working to defend or uphold this Syrian government of Assad. And this puts us in a position of a possible direct head-to-head conflict with Russia as long as the U.S. and CIA continue down this path.
Well, how does the U.S. and Russia avoid that head-on contact? Because you're absolutely right. The U.S. wants to get rid of Bashar al-Assad. The Russians want to boost him and protect him together with the Iranians, their allies, the Lebanese Hezbollah group. They're trying to prop him up. So how do you avoid that potential collision?
Very simple. The U.S. and the CIA should stop this illegal and counterproductive war to overthrow the Syrian government of Assad and should stay focused on fighting against who our enemy is, the Islamic extremist groups. Because right now we're seeing why this is counterproductive. By working towards that end, by working towards overthrowing the Syrian government of Assad, we are not only strengthening our enemy, the Islamic extremists, who will walk in and take over all of the country of Syria. Right now they have about half of the country under their control, but it also puts us in that position of a potential direct head-to-head conflict with Russia, which brings us to the brink of a potential larger conflict of a World War III type situation.
Why do you say the U.S. effort to get rid of Bashar al-Assad's regime is counterproductive and illegal?
Well, first of all, there's not been a vote in Congress to authorize the use of force, to authorize a war to overthrow a sovereign government. For as long as I've been there, that hasn't happened. It didn't happen before I got there. So the American people haven't had a choice to speak their voice, to approve or disapprove such a war. Therefore, it's illegal. Secondly, it is counterproductive because right now, U.S. arms are getting into the hands of our enemy, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, these other groups, Islamic extremist groups who are our sworn enemy. These are groups who attacked us on 9/11 and who supposedly we're trying to defeat, yet at the same time supporting them with these arms to overthrow this Syrian government.
So you don't even want the U.S. to provide weapons or arms to these anti-Bashar al-Assad rebels?
I don't want the U.S. government to provide weapons to Al-Qaeda, to Islamic extremists, to our enemy. I think it's a very simple concept in my mind that you can't defeat your enemy if you're arming them and helping them at the same time. It makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Have you told this to officials at the White House?
We've had conversations, both in hearings and otherwise, and I think it's important for the American people to stand up and say, look, we don't want to go and do what happened in Iraq with Saddam Hussein, do what happened in Libya with Gaddafi, because these are countries that have fallen into chaos and that have been taken over by these terrorists because of the actions that the United States and others took.
You tweeted recently, any candidate who supports a safe no-fly zone in Syria must admit that U.S. coalition ground air troops are needed to enforce.
Yes.
That's a statement directed at Hillary Clinton, who now supports a no-fly zone. The president opposes a no-fly zone, at least for now.
It was a statement directed at all of our presidential candidates because as they are asked these questions and are taking positions on them, I think it's important for the American people to understand exactly what those positions mean. People are calling them different things, a no-fly zone or a safe zone, but for those who are pushing for this, they've got to be held accountable for the decision they're making, that this will require U.S. air assets to enforce it. It will require U.S. air assets to take out anti-aircraft missile defense systems, for example, that the Syrian government has. And again, that puts us into a direct head-to-head conflict with a sovereign government, the government of Syria, and with Russia and their allies, and will also require a very large amount of ground troops on the ground to enforce this. There are a slew of other issues with this and why I think a no-fly zone would be a terrible mistake.
Yeah, and I know you're obviously very concerned about what happened in Libya, getting rid of Gaddafi. The current situation there is...
The same thing will happen all over again.
It's a disaster in Libya right now. All right, stand by. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. We're going to have much more right after this. We're following Russia's escalating air war in Syria with 60 airstrikes reported in the last 24 hours alone. Russia claims they're against ISIS and other terrorist targets, but the U.S. believes they're primarily targeting rebel forces fighting the government of the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. We're back with Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii. She's a member of the Armed Services and Foreign Affairs Committee and Iraq War combat veteran at the same time. Does it not concern you that Bashar al-Assad's regime has been brutal, killing at least 200,000, maybe 300,000 of its own people with these barrel bombs, and all these reports of hundreds of thousands of people who have been left homeless, billions, in fact, refugees. And the U.S. is obviously, so many other international powers are so upset about that and want to get rid of him as a result of what he's been doing to his own people over the past 4 years.
Yeah, well, if it concerns me deeply to see this tremendous and tragic human suffering, I think it's important for leaders of the world, leaders here in the United States, to look at this issue, though, and say, okay, if you do in Syria what happened in Libya, what happened in Iraq, because the same things that are being said about Assad right now were said about Gaddafi. They were said about Saddam Hussein by those who were advocating for the U.S. to go in and intervene, to overthrow those regimes and those dictators. The fact is that if that happens here in Syria, as U.S. leaders and others are advocating for, we will end up with a situation far worse than we're seeing today. We'll end up in a situation with far greater human suffering, with far greater persecution of religious minorities and Christians in Syria, and our enemy will be far stronger. They will take over the entire country of Syria. They will have greater weapons and capabilities and present a greater threat, not only to the people in the region, but to the world.
What you're saying is that the Russian military involvement on the air, on the ground, the Iranian involvement in Syria right now, the Hezbollah involvement, they're actually doing the U.S. a favor.
They are working towards defeating our common enemy. When you look at the groups that are on the ground there, the most effective fighting groups who are fighting to overthrow this government, the Syrian government of Assad, they are predominantly ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and these other Islamic extremist groups. They make up the vast majority of these so-called Syrian rebels. They are the most effective force who has gained the most territory. So the people who they're attacking in the Russians are dropping bombs are these Al-Qaeda, people who are our enemy, people who attacked us on 9/11.
So you're basically saying you don't want your fellow soldiers, and you're a member of the Hawaii National Guard. You just were promoted from captain to major. You served in Iraq. You don't want the men and women of the U.S. military on the ground in any of those areas. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, there's no reason for them to go and be deployed to these situations. I think it's important for us, first and foremost, to recognize, A, who our enemy is, and B, what our mission is. Our mission is to defeat our enemy, not to take action that's counterproductive to that mission and help our enemy get stronger. It's a very simple premise, and I think it's important for us to focus